Good evening, everyone. My name remains Mrs. Ruth Alao. I welcome you to Social Psychology class. Now, we've talked about what social psychology is all about in our last class. We've talked about how we relate, the way people think, the way people feel, the way people behave, to how it's being influenced by others. Today, we'll be looking at we've talked about self-psychology, social influence. We've talked about conformity, compliance, group dynamics. We've talked about interpersonal attraction, the way people relate to each other, what attracts people to the other. We've talked about ethics, the goal of social psychology as to behaviors. We'll be looking at impression formation. Impression formation. From what we discuss pertaining how people relate to each other, impression, what brings about impression, how do people get to like each other, what are the things that makes people to come together. We'll talk about peer group. We'll talk about how it can influence how the society, the friends, the people you move with, how they can influence the way you think, the way you feel, the way you recognize things, the way you behave. So today we'll be looking at impression formation. That's the nature of impression formation. How did we arrive at the concept of impression? Impression has to do with how we see things. Impression has to do with what are those things that makes people, that gives people the confidence that you are a trustworthy person, that gives people the confidence that, oh, that's the person I want. What are those things that make people feel alive with you, seeing you for the first time or for some time? Those are what we'll be discussing today. I will also talk about lasting impression, first and lasting impression. What prompts lasting impression? Now, impression, the natural history of human nature. How did we arrive at the concept of persons that we now see from our prehistorical past through the time? A detailed description is beyond the scope of this chapter, but Robinson provides an account of the history of thought about human nature in the West based on ideas from philosophy, that's art, religion, literature, politics, and science, with particular emphasis on the discrepancy between humanist and scientific conception. Political thought based on various conceptions of human nature can be traced from Plato through Buamister, present at interesting over how conceptions of the self have changed from the late Middle Ages to the present, with the rise of self-consciousness, the Victorian imposition of repression and resulting hypocrisy, and the consequent model emphasis on unconscious processes. Impression formation is the effect when one person first encounter another person, that's the first impression, and formed a mental image of that person. Impression accuracy varies depending on the observer and the target. The target is the person, the object, or the scene being observed. So how does it form? As in, first impression is based on a wide range of characteristics. That's age, race, culture, language, gender, physical appearance, accent, posture, voice, number of people present, and time allowed to process. In times of age, in times of race, when you see someone that you've never come across before is from a different race, there's how you view such person. Or when you see someone you are in a society or within a community that you've never met someone that has the same interpersonal relationship and the same likeness as you have. The first time you see such person, you say, yes, this will be my friend. So impression depends on the culture, the language, the gender, the physical appearance. If someone dressed in a clean way, in a nice way, you feel like, wow, see this guy, see this lady, see this man, see this woman. It all depends. So impression goes a long way, and first impression is being based on all this. Now, all these are stories. And let's look at this hypothesis or these examples. Sherwood-Roberts cave experiment divided boys into two competition or competing groups to explore how much hostility and aggression will emerge. Sheriff's explanation of the results became known as realistic group conflict theory because the intergroup conflict was induced through competition over resources, including cooperation and superordinate goals, later reversed this effect. While Lyon experiments, participants were asked to perform a boring task. They were divided into two groups and given two different payments. Some participants were paid $1 to say that they enjoyed the task, and another group of participants was paid $20 to say the same lie. The first group later reported liking the task better than the second group. Festinger's explanation was that for people in the first group, being paid only $1 is not sufficient incentive for lying, and those who were paid $1 experienced dissonance. They could only overcome that dissonance by justifying their lies by changing their previously unfavorable attitude about the task. Being paid $20 provide a reason for doing the boring task, therefore no dissonance. One of the most notable experiments in social psychology was the Milgram experiment, which studied how far people could go to obey an authority figure. Following the event of Holocaust in World War II, the experiment shows that normal American citizens were capable of following orders from an authority even when they believed they were causing an innocent person to suffer. Now let's look at this experiment by Sheriff Robert or Leon Festinger. He explained that he gave two sets of people two boring acts to perform. The first group, he gave them $1 each to tell a lie, to say the task is boring. The task was boring, but he asked them to lie that they enjoyed the task. And the other group, he gave them $20 to say the same lie that they also enjoy the task. But at the end, the first group later reported liking the task better than the second group because the first group, their pay was not enough. What is $1 compared to telling a lie? But the second group, they discovered that the amount they were being paid is enough, is satisfactory, or is okay enough for them to tell a lie. So his point here is that to overcome dissonance, there should be justification. The justification there is that they provide the second group a better pay than the first group. So if an individual is provided a pay to lie, we will just look at what is the cost of lying. You are giving 1,000 naira to tell a lie. Why not give me 1 million and see whether I will not tell a good lie? So it all depends on individual's view. Albert Bandura demonstrated how aggression is learned by imitation. This set of studies fueled debate regarding media violence, which continue to be waged among scholars. It talks about aggression, that you can learn aggression by imitating it. If you see someone speak in an aggressive way, you can easily imitate it and become aggressive. In the Stanford Prison, a simulated exercise between student prisoners and guards showed how far people would follow an adopted role. In just a few days, the guards became brutal and cruel, and the prisoners became miserable and compliant. This was initially argued to be an important demonstration of the power of the immediate social situation and is capable to overwhelm normal personality traits. However, to this day, it remains a matter of contention what conclusion may be drawn from this study. Philip carried out an exercise between student prisoners and the guards. And at the end of the exercise, in just a few days, the guards became brutal and cruel because of their social situation, their immediate social situation. But the situation within a prison is it tends to be brutal. It tends to be cruel. You have to survive, survival of the fittest. However, to this day, it remains a matter of contention what conclusion may be drawn from this. The conclusion to be drawn from this is that in any situation, any immediate social situation, it has a power, it influences, exercise an authority, a power to influence individual in the way we think, the way we feel, the way we relate, the way we behave. For example, it has pointed out that participants' self-selection may have affected the participant behavior and that the individual personality influence their reaction in a variety of ways, including how long they chose to remain in the study. One of the most concerted empirical revisitation of the themes raised by Zimbardo came with the 2000 BBC Prison Study. Let's look at the study. We are going to be talking about we'll be talking about different experiments carried out by individuals to show how individuals can be influenced by the society, by the immediate society that he finds himself. Epistemology is concerned with the basic characteristics or categories of thinking, that is to say, the framework or structural properties of intelligence. What Piaget wanted to do was not to measure how well children could count, spell, or solve problems as a way of gauging their IQ. What he was more interested in was the way in which fundamental concepts like the very idea of number, time, quality, causality, and justice, and so on emerge. Piaget was the first psychologist to make a systematic study of cognitive development. His contribution include a stage theory of child cognitive development. His observation studies of cognition in children and a series of simple but igneous tests to reveal different cognitive abilities. Before Piaget's work, the common assumption in psychology was that children are merely less competent thinkers than adults. Piaget showed that young children think in strikingly different ways compared to adults. According to him, children are born with a very basic mental structure, genetically inherited and evolved, on which all subsequent learning and knowledge is based. When forming an impression, an observer does not with every observed threat equally. There are some threats that the observer will consider more than others when forming his ultimate impression. This concept was a main focus of research on impression formation. Ash termed the highly influential traits, which have a strong effect on overall impression, as central traits, and the less influential traits, which produce smaller effects on overall impression, he called peripheral traits. This experiment is talking about basic mental structure of children. That children are born with a very unique mental structure. They think in diverse ways, and they think based on genetically inherited. Their thinking are genetically inherited, and they evolve, they improve. There are some traits that the observer will consider more than others when forming his ultimate impression. So impression can be as a result of the social the society of an individual. According to him, he defined future of a central threat that it plays a significant role in determining the content and function of other threats. Okay. Furthermore, when these participants were asked to rate which threats on the list were the most important to the formation of their impression, most reported that warm or cold was one of the most influential threats on the list. Ash then performed the same experiment using polite and blunt in place of warm and cold. Now, Ash here is talking about his experiment is a little bit similar to Piaget. The experiment he performed in the prison yard when people tend to be brutal and cruel. So he also confirmed that there are some threats that can be warm, there are some threats that can be cold, and he categorized the two threats as polite and blunt. Let's look at the implicit personality theories. The first impression individuals give to others could greatly influence how they are treated and viewed in many contexts of everyday life. Insights is 2020. They say derisively, it cannot isolate causes or predict the future. There are no control groups. And who is to say it could not have been otherwise? Were experimental social psychologists, pledged by counterfactual and mistrustful of post hoc explanation. So take this brief selection history with blah blah blah. Okay, let's move from there. What we know about first impression is that it's just what people individual give to others. It can be influenced by the society they find themselves. Now, the first impression individual give to others could greatly influence how they are treated and viewed, which is right. When you look at an individual and you see that this person is a nice person, you treat him nicely. When you see an individual and you say this person is a criminal, you treat him as such. So the first impression people give to others influence how they will be treated in their everyday life. Understanding impression formation has probably been a human concern ever since our ancestors had the mental cognitive realization that impressions do form and are not simply reflections of some reality out there. Ever since, putting aside naive realism and assumed similarity, one person gestured or grunted to another. How could you probably believe that about them? Let's look at the cognitive theory. The cognitive theory. Piaget's theory of cognitive development explained how a child constructs a mental model of the world. He disagreed with the idea that intelligence was a fixed trait and regarded cognitive development as a process which occurs due to biological maturation and interaction with the environment. Now, he is talking about cognitive development theory, and he explained that a child mental model of the world. He explained how a child thinks about the world, how a child constructs a mental model of the world. He also disagreed that intelligence was a fixed trait. So that means it's not all child that is intelligent. And he regarded cognitive development as a process which occurs due to biological maturation or interaction with the environment. He explained or employed at the Binet Institute in 1920s, where his job was to develop French version of questions on English intelligence tests. He became intrigued with the reason children gave for their wrong answers to the questions that require biological thinking. He believed that these incorrect answers revealed important differences between the thinking of adults and the children. And there are different ways a child thinks, and a child does not think based on the a child intelligence level differs from each other. It's not a fixed trait. It's not a fixed in the sense that if it is fixed, every child will be intelligent, but it's not a fixed trait. So every child differs from each other. Piaget distributes or describes his work as genetic epistemology, that's the origins of thinking. Genetic is the scientific study
Mrs. Ruth, please unmute yourself. Mrs. Ruth, please unmute yourself. Please be patient. Your lecture will join you very soon. Thank you.
Sorry for the breaking on the network. Okay, we are talking about the implicit theory. We've talked about the primary
Please share
effect.
please share your screen.
Okay, get out. Hmm. Okay, we'll talk about the effect, the primary effect, which weighs information learned first more heavily than information learned later. Now, the essence of this is that the first information learned about a person will form the impression whereby the person can be related to. Now, we have three types of primary effect, which is assimilative or assimilation effect, anchoring effect, and short-term memory. The assimilation effect is the initial threat. That's the initial information that can be integrated into an individual's global impression of a person. That is the first information learned about the person, which can be integrated into a global impression of the person. Now, anchoring effect can lead to a durable impression against which other information is compared, and it can cause people to actively change their perception of others. That's having a side thought about a person. While the short-term memory, this becomes more and more crowded with threat information, less attention can be given to newer details. Consequently, information learned earlier on has a greater influence on impression formation because it receives more attention and is remembered more clearly than later. I will end the class here, then we'll meet in our next class. We'll start with the implicit personality theories. The implicit personality theory. I will not be giving any assignment today. If you know you are here to submit your assignment for last week, kindly do so because I'll be marking the assignment and all the necessary scores will be sent to the office. Thank you and have a nice day.